welcome to the deep dive. Today we're trying to crack the code on something we're calling the quiet strategy. And it's really embodied by one of the most successful, yet maybe one of the most elusive figures out there today, Kendall Jenner.
Yeah, it's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? You look at the sources we've gathered and the story isn't, constant hustle or noise. That seems to define pretty much everything in the attention economy right now. Her story is more one of meticulous silence, calculated absence.
That's exactly the hook that pulled us in. I mean, she barely speaks on camera. She often skips the whole frantic pace of the major fashion weeks.
Right.
And you almost never see her grant those really big, comprehensive interviews. Yet she somehow built this $60 million empire. And she was reportedly the highest paid model on the planet back in 2022, apparently pulling in something like $40 million that year alone.
It's incredible. The whole world seems to be racing to get louder, faster, more visible. And she opted to be quiet. Intentional. Hyper-intentional, actually.
So our mission for you today is to sort of extract the playbook behind that. How did she do it? We're trying to look past just the surface-level fame to find the specific roadmap, How did she achieve that level of influence and financial independence, often by doing less?
Yeah, and the sources we looked at make it really clear. This wasn't just luck. It wasn't accidental. It was, and they use this word, design. It's this documented transformation, really, from a teenage reality star into this highly selective, high-leverage brand owner.
Okay, so design. What's fascinating, then, is how she seems to have quietly redefined the rules. You mentioned pillars.
Exactly. Across 6 distinct pillars. She fundamentally shifted her focus away from just collecting temporary fees, the traditional modeling gig, towards acquiring and building permanent assets, things that grow.
Right. Assets over fees. So let's dive into that first pillar, which feels foundational, the financial mindset, shifting from just getting attention to actually owning things. What was the core question driving those choices?
It seems to boil down to something pretty simple, but really profound. How long can beauty pay the bills? That question seems to be the engine behind her whole pursuit of leverage. She understood, maybe earlier than others, that modeling fees, relying on your physical presence, it has an expiration date, a shelf life, and she needed a strategy to outrun that.
That makes sense. Most models, or maybe most people in that kind of visible role, they focus on maximizing the immediate contracts, right?
Yeah.
The stacking checks game, as you put it. But the sources suggest she was playing a completely different game, the equity game. Can you break down what that really means in practice?
Sure. It's basically the difference between renting your influence and owning a piece of the outcome. When you take a fee for a campaign, you're essentially renting your face, your fame, for a limited time. That's it. But when you demand equity, you're buying into the business itself. You get a piece of the building, not just rent in it for a month.
Ooh.
So she wasn't just endorsing products. She was actively pushing to co-create them, to co-own the brands, and crucially, to co-decide on their future direction. She used her attention, which was her most valuable short-term asset, as a kind of currency, a currency to buy into long-term wealth generators.
That shift is huge. It requires serious bargaining power, though, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And I guess the perfect example of converting that attention into actual market position is 8818 Tequila.
Definitely. 818 wasn't just her face on a bottle. Our sources indicate she was involved from the ground up, the sourcing, the tasting panels, the branding decisions, and crucially, the ownership structure.
Right.
And it paid off. By 2022, it was reportedly generating tens of millions in annual revenue. Now, that's not just a modeling check. That's her converting her platform's attention into real market share in a completely different industry, beverages, miles away from the runway.
So when we talk about her definition of money, it's not just cash in the bank. It's more like this silent blueprint of an empire being drawn beneath the surface, as one source put it. It's about prioritizing what you keep, what appreciates, what earns for you while you sleep, more than just the big checks from a single campaign.
Precisely. And that mindset feeds directly into the second pillar we identified, her career strategy, which was all about building a platform, not just a fleeting presence.
And look, we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room here. She was introduced to the world through arguably the loudest possible way, the chaos, as sources call it, of keeping up with the Kardashians.
Yeah, that initial exposure, you'd think it would pigeonhole you forever as just a reality star. But she made this really strategic move, didn't she, to kind of filter that family spotlight. How did she manage to earn credibility in the high fashion world, which is notoriously snobby and selective?
Well, she had to actively distance herself, and that's where the strategic element comes in. The sources note she deliberately avoided using her famous last name in her early modeling castings. Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. She apparently wanted to be judged on her walk, on her look. She put in the work, earned her stripes walking for major designers like Marc Jacobs back in 2014. And then she quickly established herself on really prestigious runways, Chanel, Balmain by 2015. She clearly prioritized discipline, selectivity, positioning herself for longevity, not just riding that initial chaotic wave of fame.
Okay, but here's maybe a tension point, right? And where the sources get interesting. Can this quiet strategy truly exist without that massive, pre-built, very loud infrastructure she started with? I mean, she began with an audience of hundreds of millions of people who already knew her face.
That's a fair point, and it's the key distinction. She didn't build the platform entirely from scratch. She definitely inherited a massive infrastructure, no question. But the strategy was in how she converted that passive audience that inherited attention into an active business asset.
How so?
Think of her Instagram following, what is it now, like 290 million plus. It's essentially her own private utility company. It's a guaranteed distribution network for any luxury brand she partners with, or for her own ventures like 818. She used the initial spotlight as a gateway, a launch pad, but not as her permanent address, you know?
Right, so she pivoted from being just an item featured on the runway or in a campaign to being the owner of a massive distribution channel herself. And that leap into 818 Tequila, it really shows she understood that fame is leverage, sure, but a scalable business is the real end game.
Absolutely. That infrastructure, that platform allowed her to diversify into things like consumable lifestyle products, tequila, which can scale far beyond her needing to show up personally every week. She used the fame to unlock the door, definitely, but she structured the business so it wasn't totally reliant on her having to constantly stand in that doorway.
That kind of disciplined approach, it brings us neatly to the third pillar you mentioned, high-value behavior, specifically mastering restraint and scarcity. In today's attention economy, the default setting is just be visible all the time. She deliberately chose the opposite, contrast.
She effectively made herself a scarce resource. It's almost like classic economics applied to personal branding. By pulling back, often significantly, from the traditional Fashion Week circuits, especially in the 2020s, she basically inverted the value equation. She became selective, almost elusive.
So the result is, when she does decide to appear, say, walking for Versace or showing up at a Schiaparelli show, it's not just another booking. It becomes a high-stakes event. Her absence actually creates anticipation, and that anticipation adds incredible weight and value to her limited appearances.
Exactly. It's intentional operational silence. But it's important to stress that this quiet, curated image isn't effortless. It's not just her personality. The sources point to some rigorous discipline behind that calm exterior. Working with performance coaches, maintaining strict workout regimens, consciously protecting her mental health, boundaries, journaling, even digital minimalism. She doesn't just look calm. She actively works to maintain that state.
It really sounds like her success is built just as much on her refusals, the opportunity she had, the discipline to turn down, the noise she avoided as it is on her acceptances. And that kind of approach must build serious emotional durability in an industry that's practically designed to burn people out fast.
Absolutely. And that emotional durability, that sense of control, it feeds directly into our fourth pillar, her life philosophy, which seems to be centered around clarity, alignment, and agency. She clearly reached a point where she could choose how she moved through the world, rather than just constantly reacting to the demands of the industry or the public.
Yeah, there's that quote attributed to her, something like, "Freedom is being able to change your pace without asking for permission." And you see that reflected in her internal thoughts, too, like when she admitted she sometimes just wants to stop everything and design homes.
Right. That's a very reflective statement, isn't it? It's not reactive. It suggests her decisions are guided by a sense of internal alignment, not just external momentum. Her pivots into tequila, into real estate, interior design, they seem to reflect this deeper desire to shape her own rhythm, to seek out meaning, maybe even serenity, like wanting a home environment that feels calm, as a contrast to the professional chaos she operates in.
It's almost like the power of less applied to life itself. Having the clarity to do less overall, but making sure every single move is highly leveraged and deeply intentional. She seems to be constantly doing this internal audit, asking, okay, what truly matters most right now? And is this next action really aligned with my long-term goals and assets?
And that very intentionality, that clarity, allows her to wield enormous influence, which brings us perfectly to the fifth pillar, influence and the long-term play. With, nearly 300 million followers, she demonstrates this kind of quiet power. She's not dominating attention constantly, she's directing it very precisely.
The strategic disappearance is key there, isn't it? It's almost counterintuitive because the room is quiet and waiting for her next move. Every post, every appearance carries more weight. It becomes an event. So brands aren't just aligning with her for her looks anymore, but for what her presence now represents. Exclusivity, elegance, maybe even a sense of earned trust.
Exactly. And she's not just building a brand in the moment, she's building moats. That's the term one source used. These long-term protective structures that make her position difficult to challenge or replicate.
Okay, unpack moats in this context. Why is buying property a moat, for example, while doing a high-paying campaign isn't necessarily?
Think of it like defending a castle, a high-fee campaign. That's temporary income. It's valuable, sure, but anyone with enough visibility can potentially land one. It doesn't build lasting defense. A real estate portfolio, on the other hand, especially luxury properties in key locations like LA, that appreciates ideally while you sleep. It can generate passive income. And it's largely disconnected from the volatile trends of fashion or fame.
Gotcha.
An integrated company like 818 Tequila is another moat. It builds protective barriers through things like distribution networks, supply chains, brand loyalty, market share. These are much harder for a competitor to overcome than simply outbidding you for a single campaign. She seems committed to legacy, playing for the decade, not just for the immediate round of applause. She's building systems designed to generate wealth and stability, regardless of whether she's the its model of the moment.
Which leads us perfectly into the sixth and final pillar you identified, her crisis strategy. Yeah. Which is basically about investing beyond the inevitable fade of peak fame. It sounds like she was preparing for after success, even while she was arguably still right at the peak of it.
She clearly understood that fame, especially in modeling, is inherently a wave. It peaks, and eventually it breaks, it recedes. So her strategy wasn't about desperately trying to stay on top of that wave forever, trying to surf indefinitely. It was proactive. It was about building things on shore that would be resilient, even after the wave went down.
And 818 Tequila is, again, a prime example. It wasn't just a quick licensing deal where she lent her name. It was built as a proper, robust company. The sources emphasize her deep involvement in sourcing, branding, the whole story. And that commitment clearly resulted in real, verifiable momentum exceeding, $25 million in annual revenue by 2022. That company's structure itself becomes a safety net.
A very strong one. And then there's that conscious shift we talked about, redirecting energy towards things like interior design and real estate. These are worlds far removed from flashing cameras and seasonal trends. She's focusing her energy on assets that appreciate quietly, building stability away from the public eye.
We actually saw the effectiveness of this quieter, diversified strategy during the 2020 pandemic, didn't we? When the fashion world and much of the entertainment industry was completely paralyzed, she was already positioned differently. She had systems in place, businesses running, that weren't solely dependent on her physical presence on a set or runway.
She'd already bought the oceanfront, to use that analogy again, instead of pouring all her energy into just staying upright on the surfboard forever. The ultimate goal here seems to be not just accumulating wealth, but actually designing a sustainable life that can fundamentally outlive the ephemeral nature of fame, prioritizing long-term stability and, frankly, private satisfaction over constant public visibility.
Okay, wow. Let's try and synthesize this whole deep dive then. Kendall Jenner seems to have fundamentally reshaped, or at least offered a powerful alternative model for success in her field. She chose intention, resilience, deep strategy, and extreme selectivity over just maximizing exposure and noise. She literally turned catwalk appearances into capital, her follow-up account into business infrastructure, and used her fame to buy her way into financial and, it seems, personal freedom.
Yeah, and I think the real, maybe the most actionable secret here isn't just how she maximized her earnings potential, although that's part of it. It's how she managed to maintain this profound sense of alignment between her public choices and her private identity or goals. She seemed to choose being understood, making clear, deliberate statements through her actions and investments, rather than just being seen everywhere all the time.
She consciously walked away from the constant noise, the endless chatter, and built something that, in its own way, echoes far louder and will likely last much longer. We've definitely established that real, enduring success doesn't have to be loud.
And maybe this brings us to the richest secret of all, the core takeaway we hope you consider applying in your own sphere. Your ultimate value perhaps isn't measured solely by how many eyes are constantly on you. It might be measured more by how clearly you see yourself, your own long-term goals, and then how bravely you choose to act from that place of clarity. We really encourage you to think about starting your own silent shift, whatever that might mean for you.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to mull over. What's one activity, one commitment, maybe one project you're currently pursuing, primarily for that immediate hit of visibility that you could perhaps strategically replace? Replace it either with building a tangible long-term asset or maybe, just maybe, with a period of intentional strategic silence.